Fairy sightings, a thing most unusual and awe-inspiring, a thing one never quite forgets once a fairy creature has been seen. There is a thrill of experiencing something so strange, and a little fear that leaves a tingle up the spine. They are delightful things, they are gruesome things, they are good and bad and all the things all at once. In this episode we are going to be looking at some more fairy sightings from the collected records. Some of the most popular episodes of our channel are the True Fairy Sightings, a sense of wonder and awe and the feeling of the paranormal and supernatural that leaves an icy finger drawing down the back of the neck, despite the sometimes delightful nature of the sighting, because they aren't supposed to exist, surely. Surely they are a thing of fiction. But so many people around the world and in so many cultures have their variation of the fairy folk. Why? We, in our modern tumultuous world, have lost our direct connection to nature's rhythm and pattern. A breath of it can still be felt on the winds as the seasons change, but our world now is so immediate, it is hard to find the slowness needed to keenly observe, especially those things half hidden on the edge of our eyesight, in that liminal space, the periphery. Do I believe in these things? Of course I do, or I never would have started this channel. I have not experienced as much as my husband Marc, but I have seen a few things that I just cannot find a rational explanation for. I wanted to, believe me, I really wanted to, especially with one sighting because it frightened me for a very, very long time. I can appreciate it now with more life experience, but for the life of me, I can still not explain away this creature's existence, as bold and as real as one of my own pets. I will tell you this tale in a while, but for now, let's explore some more fairy sightings and experience and enjoy the tales of those lucky or unlucky people who had a true fairy sighting. During the Second World War, children from the major British cities were evacuated in droves to the countryside to keep them safe from the bombings. These children would travel on their own, all different ages, brave little souls, having to leave everything they knew as familiar behind, and never knowing what they could return to. I cannot imagine the stress that these young kids held in their hearts to have to face so much at such a young age. No child should have to face war or persecution, no matter race, religion or country. The Second World War took children from the hearts of the cities, from the rubble and the destruction to the vast fields and woodlands of Britain, to places completely unfamiliar. In 1948, one of these young children was a 10-year-old boy, E.J.A. Reynolds, evacuated from London to Horsham in Sussex. It was summer, and he was out on a moonlit night setting traps for rabbits. Not a thing I really liked the idea of, being a former bunny mum, but it was a time of hardship and food was gathered where necessary. He had decided to wait and see if he could catch anything, but instead of a rabbit though, he spied what he described as a small hairy man stepping out of a blackberry bush. His skin was very leathery. He stood only around 18 inches tall. He had a sharp pointed nose that Reynolds took note of when the creature looked to one side. This small being was very hairy, with arms longer than a human's in ratio to its body size, and it also had hands. However, he couldn't see any feet. It was definitely a flesh and bone and blood creature though. As he looked at it, it simply stepped back into the bushes. On returning to his carers and telling them what he had seen, they laughed. However, this was not the end of the story. It was a few days later when young Reynolds was travelling by bus through the Horsham area, sitting on an upstairs deck of a double-decker. It was daytime, and a different place to where he had seen the small being, but this time from his high elevation on the bus, he clearly saw the little hairy creature walking across the lawn of a very large local house. Moving forwards now to the 1990s, on the Aran Islands off County Donegal, a young lad, 15 years of age, Brian Collins, was on holiday here when he had a strange experience. He was taking a walk one early morning and saw two fishermen, but peculiarly small, fishing from a bank overlooking the sea. In height they were no more than 3.5 foot tall. They were dressed in an old-fashioned style, all in green with brown boots, and one was wearing a cap and had a grey beard. They were both talking to each other and laughing. The language they were using sounded like Irish Gaelic. They must have been aware of his presence as they suddenly jumped up and leapt over a bank. Brian rushed to where they had been to see if he could see them, or maybe where they had gone, but there was nothing there. All that was left in their place was a small clay pipe. He took it back to where he was staying on holiday and locked it safely in a drawer. On unlocking the drawer later, the pipe had completely gone. He did see the two small fellows again and tried to take photographs of them, and even tried to record them speaking to each other, but neither on film nor on recording did anything come out. And now I hope you will indulge me with one of my very few own sightings, one that for a long time gave me that cold, prickly sensation when I thought about it. I have always been a total bookworm. Even as a kid I was either drawing or reading. My experience must have been sometime in the 1980s. As usual, I was in my room lounging on my bed and engrossed in some kind of book or the other. As I was reading, I began to feel aware of something watching me, and the room began to have a weird, otherworldly feeling. Although I was aware of this, I carried on reading. However, I then began to feel that whatever or whoever it was just out of sight, hidden by the book that I was holding in my hand. So gradually, I moved the book to one side to peer around the edge. And to say I was shocked would be a complete understatement. I have very rarely in my life felt frozen in fear, but this sighting did that. Partway climbing up the bedroom curtain was a long figure, very spindly arms and legs that were tucked in. One arm was extended to the curtain rail. It was a pale grey. It had clawed hands and feet, and its face was distinctly cat-like. But not cat-like. It had small cat ears, wide cat-like eyes and nose, and a wide tooth-filled smile, and it was looking at me like, "You weren't supposed to see me." And it was still moving until it reached the top of the curtain and sort of crouched there, clinging on. If it had been stood upright, I think it would have been roughly 7 or 6 foot tall, but it seemed able to fold in on itself in an almost spider-like way. I moved the book back, and I admit I was utterly frightened. And all the time I was thinking, what the actual F is that? Plucking up the courage to look again, I peeped around the book, and it had gone. And also gone was the most viscous feel to the atmosphere that had been in the room. I got off the bed, and I think I must have leapt down the stairs about 5 at a time. It took me some time to calm down, and as I did, I became intrigued as what the hell had I just seen. I'm a kid of the 70s and the 80s, and our TV and reading material in Britain was distinctly creepy and weird, to the point that my age group and a little older are known as the haunted generation. I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but that's just how it is in Britain. So I had always had a fascination with the paranormal and the supernatural. There is a follow-up and a sort of resolution to this sighting, and how I overcame my own shivers. Many years later, my parents and I moved to Devon after I'd come back home following a relationship breakup. We opened a gallery and a workshop. We are all sculptors and artists in the family. My own jewellery work over time had become much more sculptural, and I had become quite well known for this unusual type of work. I had also moved more into expressing my art with fairy folklore and mythological creatures, which I had always loved, but over time had become my absolute passion. I made friends with a lovely couple, very bohemian, and they too loved fairy folklore and mythology. They commissioned me to sculpt a necklace for the lady of the couple, and this would be filled with fairy creatures and symbolism relating to her and her own love of her fairy folklore. And in the centre would be a stylised version of her, surrounded by all these strange creatures. The process of pinning down designs takes a while and a few months before any sculptural work is actually even started. I have to completely understand what the person wants. During one of the meetings that I had with the couple, I told them about my sighting as a young person, began to get that familiar sense of unease. And she said, "Put him in my necklace." It was a strange thing to say, but she said, "Put him in my necklace and I will take care of it." And you know what, it worked. Creating this strange creature, stylised in miniature, got rid of my fear for it. And I just came to accept it as part of my journey of dealing with unusual things. And now I appreciate its visit, although I still have absolutely no clue what the hell it was. In 1952 on Dartmoor in Devon, a place full of pixie and ghost tales and a place very close to our hearts, hence a whole series of episodes dedicated to the moorland, a Mrs. C. Woods caught a sight of a small man around 3 or 4 foot tall. It was a hot summer day in June, so not at all a creepy time of year, not that that matters on Dartmoor. Mrs. Woods was walking on Haytor with her son. She'd left her son and took a path climbing on her own, and it was now that she noticed the small figure watching her from nearby some boulders. She noted that he was wearing what looked like a brown smock-type outfit, tied with a cord around the waist. On his legs was some sort of brown material, and he either had brown hair or was wearing a flat cap. As she walked closer, she thought around maybe 40 foot away, the little fellow turned and walked back behind the nearby boulders. Mrs. Woods ran to fetch her son to witness this strange sighting, and yet by the time they returned, not only was there no trace of the little man, but also they could find no hole or crevice in the rock that he could have walked into. It was a classic Dartmoor pixie sighting, and disappearing into the solid objects is not uncommon in fairy sightings. There is another sighting that this reminds me of, one recorded by the brilliant collector of Dartmoor social history and folklore, William Crossing. By his own admission, he had not had much personal experience of moorland pixies or its paranormal activity, but he did believe in the pixies, and this was because he had actually seen one. Crossing is a real hero of ours, and the work he did collecting folklore and social lore on the moor is an invaluable resource to all who study such subjects. His sighting was, of course, it being on Dartmoor, a pixie, the only one that he ever saw himself, and validated his belief in these moorland beings. It was 1854, a beautiful summer evening, and the location was Sheepstor, a place known for its pixie folklore, and the place of the Pixies' Cave. He had been collecting lore about Sheepstor for a long time, where to find the cave, how to always leave a gift, even if just a little pin. And he had decided it was time. He would climb the hill, reach the tor and pay pilgrimage to the Pixies at their tiny cave. He had made his way over the common presided over by Anne Wilcox, who pointed out where the cave was and how he needed to reach it. He climbed over the rock-strewn landscape, it getting worse the closer he got to the cave. And as he drew even closer, he saw the pixie. It was a small figure. In his own words, he said, "Then suddenly a little creature darted out from between the masses of granite, and as suddenly disappeared. I felt quite sure it was a pixie, and I was delighted at what I regarded as my good fortune at seeing one. It was just the size that had been explained to me the pixies were, and vanished too in the twinkling of an eye, exactly as I had been taught to expect that they would." My husband and his close friend had a strange experience while backpack camping up at Sheep's Tor back in the 1980s. They were just admiring the view, which is spectacular at this point, I must say, right across the forests and the hills and Burrator Reservoir peeping through, when they heard a weird noise coming closer to them. Marc explained that it sounded like a cross between a large insect and a small helicopter. Both could hear it distinctly and were discussing it and trying to figure out what on earth it was. Marc is a keen birder, and his friend asked him if there is a bird that could possibly be. The answer was no. By this time the thing was hovering above them, possibly about a foot or two above their heads, so it was obviously not a helicopter higher up, and in the 1980s there were no drones, and whatever it was completely invisible. It was definitely a mechanical sound, definitely not an insect. It sounded too large to be any insect we would have in England, and definitely not a bird. Marc said it was as though they could have reached up and touched whatever it was not too far above their heads. And all the while they were discussing this intriguing experience, trying to rationalise and answer, as they did this, the strange invisible thing began to move away from them until the sound had merged with the usual noises of the moor. Sheep's Tor is indeed a very odd place. Now let us travel a little further back in time and to Gloucester, and a rather lovely little tale. A lady recounted that she was staying at a very old house in Gloucester. The back garden stretched out and merged with the woodland there that is called Birdlip Beeches. At that time it stretched over part of the Cotswold Hills. She had washed her hair and wandered into the trees to let it dry in the sunshine that shone through the branches, and she began to feel something pull at her hair and turned around to see what it was. She was very startled, as you can imagine, as she encountered a tiny man, about 9 inches tall, very ugly and wrinkled. She described him as the colour of dead aspen leaves, a sort of strange brown yellow, and when he spoke his voice was that of a high-pitched squeak. The reason he had pulled her hair was because, well, he was actually stuck in it, caught in some of the strands, and he was complaining that she had no right to be there. She was troubling honest folk and that he could have been strangled. At last the tiny person pulled himself free and disappeared. Some time later she spoke to a professor from Bristol University about her weird experience here, and he was not surprised at all. He explained to her that Birdlip Beeches is known to have the fairies living there, and it was one of the few places left that they lived. And it was also a place that a lot of locals avoided because of its reputation for the danger of the fairy folk living there. In 1973, an article was written under the pseudonym Circum Libra for the Lay Hunter magazine. This person recounted that it was a beautiful day in Alderwasley in Derbyshire, a day when it felt good to be alive. He had climbed a steep hill from a bridge low in the valley and away from the very busy nearby main road. He had passed by the houses that were built there, and then the hill had become less steep. The official path he was walking became twisting to one side at this point, and he decided instead to climb over a stile, creating a more direct route to the summit. On the side of the hill he noticed a mound shape and decided to see what it could be. However, the investigation yielded no clue as to what it was, so he sat down on the grass to relax and enjoy the view. After not so long, he began to feel that he was not alone, and turned to where he could feel a presence. It was not a person. Stood next to him was a strange-looking creature, a male figure, and from foot to the tip of his pointed hat, the writer estimated he must have been no more than 4 foot tall. Everything about this figure was the same colour as the grass. The man was surprisingly not afraid or excited by this small fellow, and instead it felt perfectly natural. He only felt a little intrigued and wanted to understand more. He had the feeling that this being had a message for him. The two of them conversed using only thought, and the little man conveyed the message that his work was to break down the decaying materials into food for the plants. He said they spoke in this way for some time. Finally, I will tell you a tale or two by Struan Robertson, a Scotsman who had very many fairy encounters over his life. It was an afternoon in Arran when he was walking near a field of sheep. All around were gorse bushes, and the sheep were grazing peacefully. He noticed around 10 fairy figures playing together in and out of the gorse and around the sheep. He also said that as one would approach one of the ewes, it would automatically move away from the fairy, trotting off a little to one side. Also in Arran he was exploring a woodland, and he heard an unusual sound and rushed to find out what it was and where it was coming from. He could hear talking, in what he called silvery voices, and when he found the beings, it was a clan of fairies that were hurrying along a footpath in the woods. Eventually one of them noticed him watching, and all at once all of them scattered and fled with immense speed. Let's have one more final tale from Struan Robertson. He tells us that he was near Loch Rannoch and could hear strange music coming from a stand of rhododendrons. He crept nearer to the sound and found the noise was coming from a group of fairies who were dancing merrily. He did not say how many formed this little group of dancers, but he did say that when he was around 10 paces from them, one suddenly noticed that he was nearby and alerted all of the others. This fairy being guided the others into the bushes to safety. As she too disappeared into the undergrowth, she looked back to him and gestured, a motion and a look that stayed clear to him for all of his years. And there ends another fairy encounter episode, and a real mixture of sightings and strange experiences. I know many of you have encounters with the good folk, and many of you have told me such wonderful tales in the comments. Truly every single one is valued, and I love reading your stories. It is a fascinating subject we will never tire of, and it seems that you don't either, which is great because I have many more tales to tell you. So until next time, dear friends, take best care, brightest of blessings, and remember, don't play with the fairy folk, or you may end up in one of my folk tales yourself.